What is up? What is going on, everybody? I am back with another video. Welcome back to the channel. As always, if you're new here, do me a favor, hit that like. Well, always do that. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. And everybody, please hit the like button. That just helps out the channel tremendously. So thank you to everybody that has supported the channel. I was going to do a Mariners video today. Just kind of, I like to do a weekly Mariners talk, but some bigger news has come out. Pete Carroll is out as head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. Um, I guess officially kind of mutually agreeing to part ways, although it definitely seems like probably told we're moving on and we'll allow you the chance to sort of step down. And Pete even said he fought to remain on. So it's technically, I guess, a firing. This is a tough one. And before I go any further, I do think it was probably time to make a change. But Pete is I'm way more emotional about it than I thought I would be. Um, Pete not only brought me my greatest sports memory of all time with the Seahawks winning the Super Bowl. Certainly things in my life, my marriage and my kids are over that. But after that, probably outside of my family, the greatest moment of my life. And Pete was a big part of that. And just an absolute legend, a Hall of Famer, a great human being on top of it. It's so easy to let power make you into this. We see it from some head coaches, right? I'm sorry if I'm a little bit of a loss for words, but and I just got home from work, so I wanted to do this video. Pete was never someone that let the power get to him in the wrong way. Like, you have to be a leader and you have to let people know who's in charge. And I think Pete did that. But you look around the league, look at some of these tools like Josh McDaniels that get coaching gigs, or Adam Gase. And I shouldn't call them tool. I don't know them personally. They might be nice guys. And they're awful, and you got guys like Pete who are humble enough to let players make decisions and give them some control. Also, still, there was never a question of who was in charge of this organization. Pete always keeping his cool in times. You see these meltdowns coaches have. The one year we had with Jim Mora, and he's making a press conference talking about how awful Linda Mare was because he missed a field goal, and then a field goal should have been made, but and Mora wasn't beloved in that locker room. He threw his guys under the bus constantly. You know, Guys like Pete didn't do that. That doesn't mean Pete didn't call guys out or say things that need to be said. But Pete was always one to go up there and take the heat. Even this year after everything, hey, I've got to get better. And, you know, those are few and far between. I don't remember the exact quote. So, if you look it up, it's not there. And it might not have been Lombardi, but Vince Lombardi wasn't even a quote. I think he was talking once and he said, guys that can break down plays as coaches are a dime a dozen. They're everywhere. Every single coach in this league can look at a play and tell you what defensive formation's best to counter it and do all these things. He goes, that's not hard. What's hard is, and again, I'm massively paraphrasing this, but what's hard is to find a player that's struggling in an area and to try, and a guy that's not succeeding, and bring him to success, to find what makes that player tick, to not just go, well, you're done, you're gone, to look at a player and go, okay, he doesn't do this well, he does this well, and to motivate him to get the best out of that player. That's what makes a great coach. And that's Pete Carroll. I mean, you look throughout his tenure in Seattle. I mean, starting Russell Wilson could have easily just gone to Matt Flynn. 99% of coaches would have. We paid Matt Flynn money. It's a safer bet. Taking a shot on Geno Smith to be the leader of this team. A guy that had been a backup for 7 years. All the major, what's the word, analyst and stuff. You go back to last year, Seattle was 30th in the power rankings, 31st. It was a joke that Geno Smith was going to be quarterback, and they made it to the playoffs, with Geno. And Geno's proved that he is a starting quarterback in the league. There are reasons we need that. It's probably time for Pete to go. The defense, and I'll get into that. But you also got to give Pete credit for, he's not just a defensive coach. He's a leader, a program builder. And even the guys that have had success on offense, you contribute a lot of that. You can contribute a lot of that to Pete. And then, Pete really changed the game defensively, with the big bodied corners. And I'm Pete's not the first coach that's ever wanted to have big bodied corners and stuff like that. But I mean, that's what everybody was trying to go to after that and replicate that LOB, that type of Seahawks team. Everybody was trying to do that and replicate it and do that. I've got a little cold. I'm a little emotional too. Like I said, I'm really surprised this one's hit me like this. But man, that was Pete. And then the Super Bowl. You know, you see all these teams win. It was never my team. Never got to be at the pinnacle. There were some moments, where we got there. The '05 team with Holmgren, the Sonics in the '90s with Kemp and Peyton, and the Mariners in '95. And I love Lou Piniella, love George Carl, I love Mike Holmgren. But none of them ever brought the bag home, and Pete did. And truthfully, if it weren't for a play at the 1 yard line, they would have won back to back and maybe been the next dynasty. From 2012 to 2016, this was hands down the best team in the league. I think they were best by DVOA every year. And they've still been competitive since then. It's not like they even dropped off to a point where they weren't competitive or anything like that. Pete Carroll in his tenure in Seattle coached 3 games where the team was not in playoff position or had a chance to get in. The last game of 2011, which was actually a great season because you saw the maturation of the defense and Marshawn coming alive. But that game in Arizona in 2011, and then the last 2 games in 2021 against Detroit and Arizona, the only 3 games that Pete Carroll ever coached in Seattle without any playoff implications. That's incredible. The only guy I can think that would be close to that is maybe Belichick. And if you take the last couple years, Belichick isn't even there. I mean, he coached New England, was eliminated 5-6 games ago. Pete also took over a team in 2009 that had a roster that was an absolute joke. I'm sorry, but it was. It was not only a bad roster. It may have not been pound for pound the worst team in the league, but they were old with Hasselbeck. And I love Matt. I'm not here to bash those players, but they were old. You had Matt Hasselbeck, Walter Jones hadn't officially retired yet. TJ Hushmanzada was on the team. Deion Branch, Lofa was still there. And I love some of those guys. Lofa, Matt, and Walter Jones, obviously. You had that radio show in '09 with Burleson, Branch, and Hushmanzada where they were getting into it with fans and stuff like that. It was a mess. The team was old in weird areas. They didn't have a lot of young talent. I think you had Unger and Mebane were the only 2 that were like, okay, and maybe Aaron Curry at the time, looked like some good potential young talent. And Pete took that team, and by 2012, the Seahawks were the best team in the league. I know they didn't win the Super Bowl in 2012, but they were the best team. I think they just kind of ran out of juice at the end there and having to play on the road in the playoffs. But that team, I mean, look what they did to the Niners at the end of 2012, beating them 42-13. Pete took that roster in 2009 that Mora and Ruskell left that was a disaster and took them 2 seasons to essentially make it the best team in the league. And they didn't just do it with top 5 draft picks either. They had a couple with Russell Okung, the first one. And I know I'm rambling, but Pete deserves to be rambled about. And it's an end of an era. And I'm very, very grateful because a lot of us, we live and die by this team. Maybe we shouldn't, right? We probably shouldn't live and die by football, but a lot of us do. And because of Pete Carroll and a lot of the players too, it's not just Pete, John and everything, and John's still here, but we had some of the our best ride. For a lot of us, that's the only championship we've seen, and Pete played a major role in that. And I hope the statue is being built as we speak for Pete Carroll in Seattle. So Pete, enjoy retirement. I know you're not watching this, man, but enjoy it. Enjoy getting to spend time with your wife and kids. And man, Pete better be raising that 12th man flag week 1 next year. That's all I'm going to say. If he doesn't, I'm picketing Jody Allen. So enjoy it, Pete, and thank you. As a fan, thank you for what a ride. What an absolute joy and a ride it was. With all that said, I talked about in my post game. I do think it was time for this organization to make a change. Now, I was not as hell-bent as maybe, and I'm not picking on anybody in particular, but some other people on here, on other platforms, have been very adamant for a while. And that's fine if you have been. I haven't quite been there. If Pete would have come back, I would have been okay with it. But I do think it was time for this organization to make a move. The defense has just been, for a coach that is a defensive minded coach and Pete Carroll. Now, I think Pete's more than a defensive coach. I think he's a program builder. But the defense it hasn't been good since, 2018 was maybe the last decent defense. That Pittsburgh game, and no one should base a firing based on one game. But for someone like me that was kind of on the fence, I don't know, that Pittsburgh game really pushed me over the edge. To have a mediocre team like that, I'm not trying to be offensive to any Steelers fans if you're watching this, come in and just push the Seahawks around like that cannot happen. Like I said, I've said it in my post game after the Cardinals game. It's one thing when Dak and CeeDee Lamb tear you up. It's one thing when Kyle Shanahan gets the best of you. You can't have Mason Rudolph come in there. And I know Najee Harris not a bad back. Jalen Warren's not a bad running back either. But man, that they ran over Seattle like it was prime Barry Sanders and Emmitt Smith out there. And Mason Rudolph looking like Brett Favre. You can't have that happen. I don't want to turn this into all the reasons I think Pete needed to go. And I'm not even positive he needed to go, but I do think, after 14 years or 15, I'm not sure exactly what the final total was. I think just a new voice sometimes is needed. Maybe similar to what the Eagles did with Andy Reid. Now, I don't think Pete's going to go on. I think Pete's going to retire. But, kind of in the same vein a little bit. And I will say this, I'm glad they won that last game for Pete. That wouldn't have changed anything I said in this video about Pete, but I am glad that he got to go out with a W in his final game. So listen, I think a couple things. I talked about the defense. They have not put out a good defense in years. And I know they're just kind of in another rebuild, but they kind of did a rebuild after 2017 and they didn't get to the pinnacle. Now they're doing it again. And I'm not against how the rebuild's gone, but the team is really just lacking an identity. They're not very physical. They're not feared. They're an okay offense. They're solid. I think the offense was solid, but not enough to be the identity. We're like, hey, this Seahawks team's going to put up 40 points on you week in, week out. And the defense was very poor and not physical, not what you remember from those peak Pete Carroll teams. Missed tackles, guys that look like they weren't motivated, and that falls on the head coach. I will say, I hope this wakes up some players too, because it's not just Pete either. It's some of these guys on defense as well. But I don't see the vision anymore for this team. I don't see where. I was actually going to do a video yesterday talking about this and what my thought process was for where this team needed to move on. And this is a lot of what I was going to say. I kind of just thought, like, one, I wasn't feeling all that well. I've started a new job and I thought Pete would be back. So I'm like, I'm not going to get into it. And whatever, I was fine with Pete if he was coming back. But, it's just there's no identity right now. This team is not feared. This team's not, going toe-to-toe with the best. They're not competitive with the Niners. They were competitive with Dallas, and that's awesome. But, that's really the thing. At 2012 and 2011, you saw a team that was growing, was playing the Niners and wasn't afraid. I'm not saying this team was afraid of the Niners, but they were physical enough to match with them and then, truthfully, pull ahead of them. And they're just not there. And I like some of the talent they've added in the draft the last couple of years. I think they've done a good job, but they've got to find a way to push this team back into that competition with the elite teams. Right now, they're more in competition with the Saints, the Falcons, the Vikings, and maybe not the Vikings if Kirk Cousins is healthy, but they're in that category, like teams like that. And it's not where we want this team to be. So I think it was time to make the change. John's going to stay on as GM. That was actually another thing I was going to talk about. I've always been a little curious to see John without Pete. That's not to say Pete, like I think Pete's holding John back. We may find out Pete was carrying John for all we know. But I am curious to see John get a shot at this, to have full control. Remember, Pete was hired and then he hired John. So this is kind of John's first coaching search. He's going to lead it and going to get a chance to pick the next head coach. The next head coach is going to get to pick the staff. The assistants were told they're allowed to look for new jobs. I'm kind of fine with at this point. If Pete had stayed, Clint Hurt needed to go. I was 50-50 on Waldron, but if you're going to get a new head coach, let him pick the OC here. Obviously, you're going to get a new head coach, so let him pick the OC. And I am curious to see what John does. I'm curious to see how John does without Pete. Again, that's not me saying I think Pete has held him back, but I am just interested to see what John does here as the main guy and getting a shot to kind of run this organization. So, and I'm fine with that. I would have talked about that in my video that I want John to stay on and get a shot at this to be the top dog in this organization. So we'll see what John can cook up. I'm really excited for that. I am. This is a tough video to make because I am sad. I love Pete very much. I just, as kind of I look up to him as a leader and a mentor, very much so. So, that makes it tough, but I am excited to see what John's got cooking. My choice for head coach. Now listen, a lot of names out there. They should go through an extensive search. This should not be just honed in on one guy and picking them. I want to see a lot of people brought in here, and I'll get behind whoever it is. There's a few that make me more excited than others. I do like, support, and would put my hat in the ring for Dan Quinn to be the next head coach. You might be thinking, Jay, Dan Quinn wasn't great in Atlanta. I would say it's about Quinn's tenure in Atlanta. He did finish over 500. As bad as it may look, Dan Quinn did win more games than he lost as Falcons head coach. Listen, say what you want, and they didn't win it, so they shouldn't get credit for it, but man, they were a first down away or one stop or one Julian Edelman catching with his helmet away from hoisting a Lombardi trophy. Dan Quinn almost did it. You might say, well, Jay, that was Kyle Shanahan. Probably was. It was a lot of Shanahan, right? Shanahan did a lot for that team. I will say this, Dan Quinn hired Kyle Shanahan. It's sort of like when people are like, well, Pete only won because he had Russ. Well, Pete drafted Russ and started him. So it's you can't really knock the head coach for that necessarily. So hopefully Dan Quinn has a good eye. If it does indeed end up being Dan Quinn, looks like he has a good eye for hiring talent, and that's fine. Other thing I'll say is sometimes coaches their second time around do better. Bill Belichick, if you just looked at Cleveland, that wouldn't be a guy that would necessarily be on your radar, but gets his second chance with the Patriots, actually third chance if you count kind of the Jets situation. Ends up getting Tom Brady, and the rest is history. Pete Carroll, 2 stints in the NFL, goes to USC, kind of reinvents himself, gets another crack at it. I think Dan Quinn is a very strong leader, and he strikes me as someone that would make the right adjustments. Now, what are those adjustments? I don't know. Not my real job to figure that out. That's on the front office and Jody and John to figure that out. But taking what Dan Quinn didn't do well and making it better. And I think Quinn strikes me as someone that's mature, a good leader that would make whatever those adjustments that he needs to make to be better, and he would make them. And I think I would like to see Dan Quinn get his hands on this defense. Quinn changed a lot of his philosophies from Atlanta to Dallas and from Seattle to Atlanta to Dallas. One thing is, I will say this, you can't tell me getting Clint Hurt out of there and getting Dan Quinn in wouldn't immediately improve this defense. I mean, I think that alone, even if you kept the same 11 guys out there, would take this from 27th ranked defense to at least like 20th. And that probably would have been good enough to get in the playoffs this year. I'm not saying that's where I want this defense to be, but I think that alone would give you a massive improvement. And, like I said, Quinn hired Kyle Shanahan. And even, as much as Kyle Shanahan's another one. Now, he wasn't a retread head coach, but Shanahan was an OC in Cleveland and Washington. So, there were people that were kind of like, that's a nepotism hire. And now he's one of the best coaches in the NFL. So, like I said, Quinn shouldn't be the only guy. Ben Johnson's out there, the Lions OC. Eric Bieniemy. I'm not as big on Bieniemy. Some stuff from his college days, which I won't get into it, but you can look some of that up. People do deserve second chances. I have a little bit of trouble with some of that stuff that Bieniemy was into, but it is what it is. I will say this: Bieniemy's resume doesn't necessarily impress me. Chiefs OC with Andy Reid's playbook and calling plays and Patrick Mahomes. Not going to sit here and say that's always easy, but I think a lot of OCs could succeed in Kansas City um, at that point. And then he was okay in Washington. He did some decent things with Sam Howell, but it still wasn't a good offense. So I don't know. I'm not as wild on Bieniemy. Doesn't strike me as the type of leader. I like Ben Johnson. I think he's done a good job in Detroit. I don't know his leadership capabilities. And that's the big thing as a head coach. Isn't just, oh, he's a great play caller. Well, you got to do more of that as a head coach. It's great if you're just an OC. But as a head coach, it's a little different. So the reason I kind of like Dan Quinn is I see a guy that represents a good leader. I'm not saying Bieniemy and Ben Johnson aren't. Maybe they are great leaders. I don't know. And if Seattle hires Eric Bieniemy, it's not my first choice, but I think there's reasons that it could be a good hire. I know a lot of people will say, oh, you got to hire OCs. This is we're seeing all these head coaches now, and the most successful ones are offensive coaches. There is some truth to that, and I'm not against this team looking at an offensive-minded head coach. But I will say, looking at Seattle, the offense is okay. Like, there needs to be some work on the offensive line. I'm not saying it's perfect, but overall, I think the offense was good enough. I'm simplifying things. I'm not going to go into a whole looking up all the numbers dissertation here. The defense was a mess. You're in a division where you've got to figure out how to stop Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay. Dan Quinn may be able to do that. Maybe he doesn't. I don't know. None of these are slam dunks. You could hire, anybody and it could work out or could not. Listen, there's also guys that we're not talking about. It's not always OCs, DCs, or former head coaches. John Harbaugh was a special teams coach. I don't know if it was Andy Reid or John Gruden was a quarterback's coach when they were given a job. I think it was Reid that was a quarterback's coach and Gruden was the OC. At the time, I think Gruden ended up being Reid's OC, if I'm not mistaken, in Philly. There could be someone that's coaching a bad team that just doesn't have the talent. I'm just bringing up a name here, but like the Giants OC is Mike Kafka. Kafka might be a train wreck. I don't know. But, he may be a great play designer, but he just doesn't have the horses to make it work. So, it could be someone like that for all we know. It doesn't have to be an OC from the best offense in the league or a DC from the best defense. It could be someone outside that realm, possibly. So, who knows? Bring in as many people as possible. Brian Flores would be an interesting name. I know there was some struggles with him as a head coach, but he's a guy that could learn from that as well. So, there could be some college coaches. I don't follow college ball as much. Jim Harbaugh. I'm not a big Jim Harbaugh guy necessarily. But Harbaugh's a proven pedigree winner. So, I'm throwing names out there. So if you're like, oh, I hate Jim, fine. You might hate Quinn. You might, whatever. These guys could all work out. It might be none of those guys. We don't know. That's what John's job is. And the rest of the, Seahawks executives, that's their responsibility to get that figured out. I personally like Dan Quinn. That would be my choice. If you had to put a gun to my head and for me to hire a coach, doesn't mean it's going to work out. If that's the case, I don't know. I don't know any of these people personally. So I like what Quinn's done in Dallas. I think he's a good leader. I think he's got, shown a good track record hiring an OC like Kyle Shanahan. Listen, he wasn't a Brandon Staley, Josh McDaniels train wreck as a head coach. In fact, he was a minute away from being a Super Bowl champion. I will say this, organization's going to miss Pete. Pete's a Hall of Famer. Those are not easy to replace. And there's a very good chance the next Seahawks head coach is not even close to as good as Pete Carroll. I'm not saying that to be negative. I'm just saying, like Hall of Fame coaches don't come along. Seattle's been very blessed. Mike Holmgren, Pete Carroll. We had to suffer through a year of Jim Mora, Chuck Knox back in the day. I will say when they moved on from Chuck Knox, we had to sit through Tom Flores, who was rough. Dennis Erickson was a little better, but just couldn't get the team over the hump. Holmgren started out sluggish, then got the team going, and then, the year of Mora and then Pete. So we'll see where they end up going. Thank you to Pete Carroll for everything you've done for this organization. The city, this organization, all better for having Pete Carroll part of it. Thank you guys for watching this. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe if you're not. And a new era of Seahawks football is coming, and I will have updates on the coaching search. You can put me down for my hat in the ring is in support of Dan Quinn if you're making a list for what YouTubers support what coach, but I'm open to a lot of different options. I'm not one to you know, shoot down anything. So, unless it's something really, really bad. So we'll see. Have a great day, everybody. Take care. Like, comment, subscribe. And I'll see you guys later in the week with a Seattle Mariners video. Peace.